Esther.
Hey, Florian.
All right, we're back with another week of Slator Pod. A lot of exciting stories to talk about this week. So I think first we're going to talk about the results of two of our super agencies. We got STL and TransPerfect that have announced their annual results. Then you're going to walk us a little bit through our M&A report, language industry, mergers and acquisitions report, and funding
And
report.
funding, yes, not to be
funding
forgotten. Yeah.
That we published, I think it was Tuesday.
Yep.
And then we're going to discuss something that I found very interesting. Amazon just published a research paper about machine dubbing. Let's talk about that. And then there's a strike going on in the Netherlands. Interpreters and translators are on strike. So that's it's quite a story. Actually, on our website, a lot of people are reading it right now. So, well, without further ado, tell us how the year has been for STL and for TransPerfect.
Yeah, so maybe kicking off with STL. So they didn't officially sort of announce figures per se. Those figures will actually appear in their annual report later in March, I believe. But as a listed company, they provided a trading update on how the year had been for 2019. So overall, they confirmed that the analysts' expectations for the year were on track. So they were in line with previous forecasts that analysts had made. So this roughly puts them still under the $500 million mark in dollars, but around sort of 490 million US dollars. So overall, I think about a 15% increase on 2018, and a lot of that driven also by revenues coming from Donnelley acquisition, which happened in mid 2018. So this will be the full year. First full year that they've reported inclusive of Donnelley for the entire year.
So just to back up for a second, so they didn't actually announce those figures, correct?
Exactly.
They basically just said, hey guys, we're confirming what the market, i.e. the analysts, right? The analysts at the brokerage firms have expected. And are expecting from us, and we're confirming this. So we had to go back and dig through the analyst reports and the consensus estimates to actually come up with those numbers, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. And obviously they're reporting in British pounds. So in British pounds, the sort of aggregate of the consensus was more along the lines of 375 million pounds.
Okay, so we did. There's some foreign exchange factors in there. There's some
a few different things still, but I mean that puts them probably well above the closest competitor, which would be RWS, another listed company in the UK who reported back in September.
In terms of revenue, right?
In terms of revenue, yeah, not in terms of market cap. However, RWS's market cap is well over, I think, 1 billion.
It's like $2 billion.
It's huge. I lose track.
Yeah, they're much more profitable. That's why, the market capitalization is essentially the value of the company, the company's shares on as listed on the stock market. So STL's is around, I think, 600 million.
740 million last time.
Dollars. Okay, dollars.
Yeah. Dollars. Sorry.
RWS's is like 2 billion. So. Okay, in terms of revenue, STL is ahead. In terms of value of the company, RWS is significantly ahead.
Correct. Yeah.
Cool.
And then on to TransPerfect, who's likely to retain the top spot in terms of being the largest revenue generator in the LSP space for 2019. So they announced revenues of just over $750 million. So $764 million for 2019. So another year of growth for the company. They slowed somewhat in terms of growth compared to 2018, when that was a huge sort of organic growth year for them. This year, slightly more modest, still single digits in terms of the growth, and this year, I should say last year, 2019, it was driven in part by a number of acquisitions and in part organically also.
But I think mostly organic still, right? And we estimated the organic
Yeah.
portion of the growth to be about $45 million.
It looks like
So-
that. I mean, they did a lot of acquisitions, I think 8 in total in 2019, but most were relatively small. So I think the largest
Okay.
acquisition was of a media localizer called Lilo, a Paris-based media localizer. And
Isn't
their
that the
revenue-
gaming company?
Lilo, no, Mogi is the gaming company.
Oh, okay,
Lilo,
sorry,
yeah,
yes.
Lilo was the media localizer, and they were around just under $15 million in revenue estimated.
Got it.
So yeah, you're right that still a lot of that growth will have been organic from TransPerfect. So another sort of solid year for them as well.
Let me ask you something. Why does TransPerfect announce this at all in January? I mean, I understand why SDL and RWS and all these publicly listed companies, they have to. It's a regulatory requirement. But why does TransPerfect do this?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, they like to announce that they're growing. Who
Okay.
doesn't? I suppose. I mean,
Probably.
they're still probably at the top. I mean, obviously, Phil Shaw spoke at SlatorCon San Francisco in 2019 as well, and his presentation was all about growth and growth trajectories. So, I mean, I think it's probably something which is kind of baked into the culture of the company now.
Now it is, yeah, because previously they were a lot more guarded and private, and then they had this leadership struggle, all the litigation. So I think they decided to become a lot more public. So yeah, it's interesting that a private company would, announce less than 4 weeks into the year, about their revenue and being very public about it, even though there's absolutely no need for them to do this publicly.
Well, and it's good also. I mean, just to finish off the section about TransPerfect, but I mean, it's interesting as well for them to comment on the key areas of growth for their business. As we sort of look at key areas of growth for the industry at large. I mean, I think TransPerfect identified. Obviously, media and gaming would have been a huge area of growth for them because of the acquisitions in that space. Or certainly moving forward, they're looking for it to obviously generate revenues. Also AI data collection, which we've covered quite a lot on Slator over the past couple of years. They identified that as a strong contributor to their revenues, as well as the TMS. So the TMS.
That's interesting, yeah. So they have their TMS is probably one of the biggest in the industry, if not the biggest. It's they have a lot of clients for that. All right, let's move on to the M&A report, because a lot of these companies, TransPerfect grew partially through M&A, and so did SDL. So, M&A stands for mergers and acquisitions, and the reason why we're covering this very actively is because the language industry is heavily fragmented. So that means there's a few of these large players at the top, but then you have dozens of, large to mid-sized players, and then hundreds, if not thousands, of very small players. So a lot of these companies are looking to grow via acquisition, and the term for that is, they call it M&A, mergers and acquisitions. So this year, or rather last year, it was a very active year, and for us, we're tracking this, and the readers or the people who are actually reading this report, buying this report and reading this report are, founders who may be looking to sell their business eventually, or, private equity funds that are owning some of these businesses and are looking to exit, or private equity funds that are looking to enter the space and buy. So there's quite a large constituency of people who are interested in this type of data, and it's very hard to get this type of data. So I think they appreciate somebody who actually collates it and puts it into a report. We realize this is not the most relevant topic for the production side of the translation localization industry or the linguist side, but for anybody that has anything to do with the investment side, this is highly relevant. So you just maybe share a few of the highlights of the report with us.
Yeah. I mean, I would say just one note that it potentially is relevant in some way for linguists, because I think the areas that people are doing M&A indicate sort of key areas of interest for investors. So it signals where growth is hopefully likely going to be for the market, which is also a good indication for linguists of potentially where future sources of work may come from.
Yeah, you're right. And
that's my take on it as well.
No, you're right. And it's also relevant in the sense that if you have two clients and they merge, then you end up having one client. So
Yeah.
Yeah. So
one new client and having to negotiate rates again, I would imagine.
That's right.
Potentially. So I guess some key highlights from the M&A report. I mean, we now have, I think it's 3 years worth, at least 3 years worth of data, but it's been 3 years that we've published this M&A report in some form. I mean, for 2019, total transactions, so total numbers of deals, mergers and acquisitions were up again, quite significantly, I think about 20% on 2018. Most of the deals that are happening still are company to company. So this is typically one LSP buying another rather than an outside buyer coming looking for an LSP to buy, or rather than an investment firm buying an LSP. And on the investment side, there were fewer private equity backed LSPs doing deals in 2019. So, the likes of Lionbridge, WeLocalize, a bunch of others are backed by private equity firms. But this year, in 2019, there were fewer total deals done by the likes of those who with private equity backers. And this is likely to be because there are a number of these private equity firms that are looking to exit their existing investments in LSPs. So we know this already. And then geographically speaking, the US was the main location, really took center stage. I mean, I think in large part because TransPerfect was so active in M&A in 2019. So the US was the top location for buyers. It was also the top country for sellers. However, the top location for sellers was Europe. So Europe had more than 50% of all sellers in 2019.
So America is buying Europe.
Oh, come on. Now you're going to make me think about the NHS and all of that privatization. Anyway, bad vibes. But yes. So in terms, I guess, cross-border, so that was the other point I was going to make, is that on the geography side, a lot of the deals, about 50%, so it's a rough split, 50-50 between deals that are happening internally in countries, so someone in Germany buying someone else in Germany, and cross-border. So, for example, a US buyer buying a UK LSP, 50-50.
Okay.
And then in terms of verticals, I mean, I think it will come as no surprise that media localization, there was a big surge in acquisitions of LSPs or media localizers, we'd call them, in this space. Again, that is somewhat skewed by TransPerfect, who did 7 deals in that space, but also Straker, I think, did 1 or 2. So that there was definitely a surge in the interest in media localization from buyers, and beyond that, multi-vertical. So LSPs doing more or less, a range of verticals. Also, was the top sort of selling vertical in 2019, and beyond that, quite a good mix across the different specialisms.
Okay, and then we also briefly covered the startup, but I think we already spoke about it in a previous podcast, right? That there's a fair amount there was a bit of an increase, but you had Unbobble being kind of the standout in 2019. I think if you filtered Unbobble out, it would have been a normal year.
Probably.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, the number of deals, a number of investments are up. The amount of funding is up, but probably, Unbabble had a lot to do with that. And then beyond that, I think key takeaways are probably AI is big. AI-backed companies, that tends to be the type of company that's getting interest. And for the core localization space, this obviously means neural machine translation. And I
mean, they're calling it AI, right? It's just that in the marketing PR, essentially we're leveraging machine translation. Exactly. And then we're branding it as AI. But I think it's hard to go to the investment community now with any translation related proposition if you don't give it a very strong AI label, right? So that's what we've seen. And that's what exactly the investors like.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Great. So lots of interest already in this report, and obviously we're looking forward to speaking about it at future Slator cons as well. So one of the stories that I loved this week was Amazon published a research paper that they're looking into machine dubbing, right? So last couple of years, I wrapped my head around cloud dubbing. I mean, we had Stuart from the CEO of Zoo Digital at our 2018 SlatorCon, and Zoo is very active with cloud dubbing, which means you can sit in your home or in like a home studio and you can dub from afar, as opposed to having to go to a proper studio and, you know, with all the infrastructure around this. And so you have cloud dubbing, which is still very kind of frontier, next generation type of activity. And here we are, you know, going through some of those research papers that are being published and finding that Amazon is now going machine dubbing. And the researcher that was in the lead is no other than a gentleman called Marcello Federico. And he has a long history in the language industry. In fact, he was among the co-founders of MateCat, the cat tool, which is backed also or co-developed by Translated.net. He was also instrumental in the MMT machine translation platform, Modern MT, which is also, I'm not sure about the exact setup there, but co-developed or co-marketed by Translated.net. So, but in September 2018, Marcello was hired by Amazon, AWS, and is, you know, moved to California and is now a principal scientist. So, yeah, when I came across this paper, it was so interesting. So it was a limited trial. So they took not a bunch of, like 24 TED Talks, English TED Talks. It took maybe a 10, 20 second sequence, and then, you know, used speech to text and machine translation and then text to speech, and thereby dubbed the English TED Talk into Italian. And then they added, like, you know, the background noise so it would seem more natural. And they did like A, B, or C versions. And it was interesting. They mentioned that when they tested it, they had 14 people testing it, and about a dozen of them were Italian native speakers and the rest were English speakers. And the result was actually different in terms of which group preferred which version. So the Italians preferred one version, and the English speakers preferred another version. So comprehension of language apparently does make a difference for that. So it's, you know. Okay.
So these were English speakers who understood Italian?
No.
Who were listening in Italian, or who
they listened, they watched and listened to the Italian version without actually understanding the Italian. So they were just looking. I mean, they didn't understand what the person was saying, but they just looked at it. Just the impression.
How pleasing it was to the ear.
Exactly, right? And how aligned it is. So they found, let me just read this off here. It says the main problem was the unnaturalness of the speaking rate. It was either too slow, too fast, or too uneven.
Uneven, okay.
So, I mean, it's super hard, and it's it's next generation natural language processing. But it's interesting when you speak to people from the media localization space. I mean, they're saying, look, cloud dubbing, not so sure about it. You know, it would help if it worked, but we haven't really seen it working that well in that many scenarios yet. And here we are already looking at machine dubbing. So, you know, it's moving quite quickly there as well.
But it's interesting when all of those things come together, isn't it? I mean, separately from media localization, you have AI transcription happening, you have speech to text. Sorry, that is speech to text, but you have then synthetic voices happening. And it's interesting to see the final result when you're trying to plug all of these things into each other.
Exactly. And that's how they pitched it. They actually said, this is the first time somebody used what they called enhanced deep learning models for MT, speech to text, and audio rendering. So yes, you're taking all of these components and you're putting them together. And when we were doing the research for the story, we were looking, well, is there something like automated dubbing? Has anybody done this in the past? And you're getting to like really bad YouTube videos where like somebody says they have a system, but it's like, it's basically just a voice, like a voiceover. I mean, somebody voiceovered some like a speech, and it was just atrocious. Didn't work at all. Right. Yeah. So I think that this is actually quite trailblazing. And yeah, once you put all these components together, you can do a lot of cool stuff. So
maybe they
see
should
how this
combine
works.
it with what is it, Synthesia, who does the lips.
The lip stuff, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's like the final touch to try.
Yeah,
and
I
make
came
it.
across a few of those videos when we were researching the story. It just looks still somewhat awkward. And when people, I mean, an actor wouldn't want his lips to move differently, right? I think, I'm not sure about the future of this. Like when you're an actor, you're like, no, you're not going to AI change my lip movements. Like I'm a star, right? So,
Right.
I mean, that's also what I think somebody said at our London media localization panel in 2019. They said,
I think it was Jan, wasn't it? From
that's going to be a hard.
UK.
That's going to be a hard sell to the acting community.
It's true.
But generally, dubbing is a major component and cost factor in media localization. So, any type of, maybe not this type of full automation, but any help is likely to go and find traction quite quickly. Yeah. So we're knee deep in media localization anyway now, because we're planning the May conference in London. So anyway, very different topic. Moving on to the Dutch, who are on strike. Apparently 1,500 to 2,000 Dutch translators and interpreters are on strike because the government has put forward proposals to allow outsourcing, in the judicial space and the courts and the police stations, to less qualified linguists and translation, what they call translation agencies. So they're actually on strike right now, and this is big repercussions to the system because, if the police want to interview somebody who doesn't speak Dutch, then there's no interpreter at the moment. So
is it across all? Is it a blanket strike across all languages? How many people are striking? Do you even know that?
Yeah, there's, as I said, 1,500. So if you have
1,500, right?
Yeah, if you have 1,500, that's, to me, that seems a fair chunk of the overall interpreting and translation community, or interpreting community in the Netherlands. So I think
a lot of people.
It's a lot of people, and it's probably picked up more traction. So they're going to have to find a resolution relatively quickly. And it's, as I said, it's quite disruptive. So you have something from the UK. I mean, we had this not similar stories. I mean, in the UK was also a giant contract that was tendered out in 2011, and then that was that caused a lot of problems and ripple effects down the road. But I think now they fixed it. But now there's another development, you said?
Well, I mean, I think all of this stuff in the UK is kind of bubbling under the surface, I would say. I mean, obviously we had the kind of catastrophe and lots of news coverage about the MOJ contract a while back. I mean, just because I think there's not a lot about it in the news, it doesn't mean that it's not still a problem. I mean, I think generally rates are low. Interpreters in particular are quite unsatisfied in terms of what's happening with public sector interpreting. But I mean, I think that some people are trying to take steps to improve the situation, as I understand it. So apparently the police force, for example, are looking into the possibility of paying guaranteed minimum rates to interpreters. So this would then require that any LSP or middleman would guarantee a minimum rate, or a specific rate, I think, to interpreters, and then tell the contracting body, the client essentially, how much on top of that they would charge for their services. So I think this is something which is in the works. It's not been rolled out, and I don't know the timeline for it. But I mean, I think that's something that probably a lot of interpreters would welcome in the space.
It's so different here. I mean, here being in Switzerland, where I live, it's super decentralized still. There's no kind of nationwide vendor that takes the entire volume. It's individual interpreters that are on individual courts lists, and then they just get pinged, or certain police districts that ping, they have like a list with maybe 500 interpreters, and they would just reach out to them individually. I think that was the case in Denmark before they centralized, and maybe now in Holland, in the Netherlands, they want to also begin to centralize. So I think generally in Europe it's still somewhat fragmented, maybe more like the Switzerland approach, with maybe the exception of some of the Nordic countries and the UK. But here it's very, very different. I wonder if they're ever going to try this approach here as well. But then again, they should go to Denmark and the UK and look for lessons learned. So and so we spoke a bit about those meetups in one of our previous podcasts. So I'm heading to the MT meetup probably in early February in Zurich here. It's actually very interesting. It's put on by a company called Tech Shuttle and an MT, MT tech and service provider, I guess you would call them now. Kind of a smart move. I mean, they're calling it a meetup, but in a sense, it's kind of a great lead generation event for them as well, right? Yeah. But it started out as a fairly academic affair, and now it's quite business focused, and there's a fair amount of service buyers there, and also linguists. So it's quite an interesting event. What about you? You're getting ready for Ottawa at some point?
Yeah, heading to Ottawa, Canada at the end of February. So just putting in place preparations for that. But yeah, I think we spoke about that one already. I'm going to go speak at the ALIA event, which should be interesting. Will be my first time in Canada.
First time in Canada, nice. Okay.
Yeah, very nice. But no, beyond that, no real travel plans. I mean, that's just going to be a very quick stop.
And unfortunately, the next SlatorCon is going to be in London, so that's just down the road.
I know.
So you went to check
I don't get to travel anywhere.
No. Well, it's good.
20 minutes down the road.
20 minutes down the road. So you went to check out the location. Actually, I haven't been there before. I was just looking at the pictures. So it's a pretty cool location, right?
Yeah, it's really nice. So right on top of Liverpool Street Station, so pretty central for anyone coming from the city, or obviously, kind of commuting in, whatever. Nice hotel as well, one of these sort of boutique ones that's, I think, quite an old building. We like that. Yeah, it's got character. It's an old building that's been refurbed and done up to really high specs. So I'm looking forward to being there in May.
And we got the exhibition space. So this is the first time we actually we're allowing sponsors to put out booths, right? So there's like an outdoor area, or outside of the main conference room. So I think it took us a while to wrap our heads around that and get some of these booth suppliers in line. But I'm not going to bore people with details there. But it's an interesting challenge now to put on a bigger show. So I guess the next couple of weeks, next 2, 3, 4 weeks are going to be we're going to be very occupied by with setting this up. But still time to get some super early bird tickets. Got about 7 days left, and then we're moving to the next pricing stage. So you better buy your ticket now. So on that plug, let's end it for today. We almost did half an hour, so that's great. Well, thanks a lot, Esther.
Thanks, Warren. See you later.
All right. Cheers.
Bye.